Pete got his start in model railroading a little later than most folks in his mid 20s. He picked up some used in scale equipment from a local shop and started this 45-year journey. Pete has built several layouts over the last 30 years, but a move to Houston in 2012 gave him the opportunity to switch to ON30. He has been active with Houston San Jacinto Model Railroad Club and has served on the board of directors for the Lone Star Region NMRA. Pete has presented clinics on several modeling and prototype topics at local, regional, and national levels. He has authored over 85 articles that have been published in local club newsletters up to the National Hobby Press. Pete earned his MMR number 649 in 2020 with the help of some great local to Houston model railroaders. On a personal note, Pete has been married to his wife Kathy for 48 years. They have 2 grown sons and 3 grandchildren. In 2023, Pete retired from the Velcro companies after 41 years of service. In 2025, Pete and his wife moved from Houston to San Diego. So, Pete, it's yours.
This clinic is about starting over, or more specifically, about planning and building a new layout when you're a little later in life. Now, last May, I talked about tearing down my dream layout that Mark just mentioned. It was an ON30 version of the main 2-footer, the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railway, as it ran around 1925. Now, why would someone tear down their perfectly good finished dream layout? Well, maybe the layout goals are complete and there's really nothing left to work on. Well, for me, I still had a few improvements to make. I had a couple of switches that spanned a movable section that I had some ideas to improve operations. And I was looking to develop an operational scheme to share with some friends so they could run on the layout. Up to that point, I'd really only run it by myself or with my 2 grandsons. Or maybe you're going to move. There's a change of residence. That would be a reason to tear down your layout. And as we age, we may want to move to something a little bit smaller. This is what happened in my case. Being retired, my wife and I wanted the freedom to travel and a reduced need to maintain a home. If you own a home, you're constantly repairing, replacing, or fixing something, and we wanted to get out from under that. So we started looking for smaller homes or 2-bedroom apartments that we could just rent. That would require me to dismantle my old layout. Well, it did come down last February. It's been almost a year now. This is the town of Albion, what's left of it. All the structures are gone. All the trees and scenic materials are being pulled and the rails are coming up. So what took me 10 years to build and at least 20 years of gathering information materials to build it came down in 3 days. All this meant one thing: starting over. Now, starting over in a new layout can be a little bit overwhelming. Do that when you're at a later stage in life. It's even more so. I'm about ready to turn 71, so I consider myself in that bracket. Now, with the layout down, it was time to get the house ready to sell. Sounded easy. So we got our realtor in. She talked about all the things we needed to clean up and fix and depersonalize and all that stuff. But we did all that stuff before we headed out to San Diego for a 3-month vacation where we had planned to rent a condo on the beach and enjoy the sun. And then we would just sell the house, list it when we got back in September at the end of summer. So while we were enjoying the sun and the beach of Southern California, an opportunity came up. It was for a 3-bedroom house, about 1,100 square feet, half the size of our house in Texas, built in around 1957, in a nice, quiet neighborhood of San Diego. It came with a 2-car garage, an oversized 2-car garage. And out back, there was a small building that was climate controlled, and it was big enough that I think I could build a new layout. And it came at a great price. It was my son's old house. Him and his wife had purchased a new home, bigger, not too far away, and they were going to rent out the old house. Now, as we were visiting one night this past summer, I left the room for a few minutes. When I came back, my wife and my son had cut a deal I couldn't refuse. Now, starting over on a new layout when you're over 70, like I said, is a bit overwhelming. Now, do include a move of 1,500 miles, it was downright frightening. So, some things to consider when you're starting over. Some of the materials that we've used in the past are either not available or very expensive now. Things like Homosote and cork, I find harder and harder to find. And rail and flex track and lumber has gotten very expensive. If you haven't bought anything in 15 or 20 years, your jaws will drop. All this may mean we need to find some and start using some new materials and techniques that we may not have used before. Also, some of our skills may be diminished from before. Things like eyesight. I never wore glasses until I was in my 60s, and now I'm nearly blind without my bifocals. Mobility and flexibility. We mentioned earlier, I think Seth mentioned earlier about climbing under a layout. Well, I don't, the thought of me crawling under a layout to do wiring or installing switch machines is just frightening. It's something I don't think I physically want to do. My strength and stamina certainly isn't what I was when I was in my 20s. I can't lift like I used to, and I certainly can't work at the workbench for the whole day like I did when I was younger. Also, so for older folks like me, we need to consider the scope of the layout project. How long are we going to continue to work on this? Is it realistic when you're over 70 like me to take on a 20 or 30-year project to build a layout? Also, consider the amount of time it takes to maintain this future layout. Do you want to just build a partially built diorama? Now, smaller spaces also, well, can mean smaller layouts. Is this going to fill our hobby needs and wants? Is this going to satisfy us? All this could be a chance to try some new things, which I find exciting. Here are some of the things I've learned so far. Plan the move before the move. The track planning process needs to start as soon as you can. The move itself is just frightening, and getting started on the new layout. So let's start with planning the move before the move. As you're looking for new spots, we would go with our realtor and agent. We would look at apartments or condos or homes. I would look around for areas where I could build a layout. And I took a tape measure with me in a notebook to record key dimensions. I got some weird looks from the agents. What are you doing? And when I told them, I got even weirder looks, but that's okay. We're model railroaders. And I would jot down, this is the page from the house in San Diego, where I took note of any potential obstructions, the typical windows, doors, take accurate dimensions of the walls, etc. Also, look for things like this HVAC split up in one corner that was going to potentially interfere with a layout. Also, when we're looking around, we need to look for other spaces that we may need besides the layout, places to store our supplies and materials during the build. Now, if we've been at it as long as I have, we've got buckets full of all this stuff supplies. Do we need to have all of our scenery materials underfoot while we're building a layout? Probably not. Also, look for areas for a workshop. If you're going to get into a smaller space, you're going to want to not get all that hammering, sawing, and drilling that you may have done in a bigger area. So you look for another area that you could use. So I know I was losing a pretty good storage space in the old train room. That was built in a separate bedroom with a pretty good sized closet that I built some shelves that I could put plastic bins of scenery materials and kits and all that stuff. Now I was going to need to find a place like the garage out here for storage and workspace. That was unthinkable in Houston because about 6 or 8 months of the year it's too hot. But out here in San Diego, it's a little more temperate. So working in the garage almost year round is not a problem. So here's the notebook of the garage as I made notes of like the doors, utilities, potential spots for shelving or a workbench. Also, start making note of your key must-haves for the layout, things you cannot live without. But you need to consider the space that you'll have and keep your scope and physical abilities in mind. You may need to pare down those must-haves. The things you had in your 20s or 30s, maybe less. Start using all this information to start the track planning process. So for track planning, if you're like me, I've got paper files of inspirational track plans I've seen and collected over the years, or digital on my computer, or just doodles and thoughts that you've accumulated. So that's what you need to start pulling out. But you also need to think about the practical size that'll fit into your new space and the scope that you're looking at. And also start thinking about what are your key wants for the layout. What are your goals? I believe every layout should have some goals, just a handful, not a lot. In my case, I wanted to see what would fit into a 10-foot long wall. As we were looking for apartments and homes in Houston area, it wasn't very hard to find a spare bedroom, a den, or a study or a bonus room that had at least a 10-foot wall that I could build on. So I thought if I could design something around a 10-foot wall, you can always make it bigger. I want to stick with ON30 because for me, it's one of the perfect scales and gauges. The equipment's heavy enough to operate well. It's large enough that I can do detailing as much as I want. And an ON30 freight car isn't really any bigger than a modern HO freight car. So it takes up about the same space. Now, when I was working before I retired from the Velcro companies, I had a home office there in Houston. I had this 10-foot long wall that I used to dream about building a layout on there. I would doodle some thoughts when I was in some of my boring Zoom meetings. And this particular one stuck out at me. It was a freelance coastal Maine 2-foot railroad that would fit in that space. Now, I never got to build this because my wife rejected any idea of letting the trains leave the train room. But this did convince me that I could have a pretty good switching layout in that scale and gauge, a lot of car spots, also enough waterfront to keep my boat building hobby habit satisfied. Now, for layout goals, for me, I want a freelance layout with a Maine coastal theme. My previous layout was prototype based. And I struggled well, that kept me focused. I struggled at times. Every time I would go to put something on the layout, I had to justify, did it belong in that era? Did it belong on that prototype? Did it belong on that particular locale? So a freelance layout will let me just draw from various things, especially along the Maine coast. There are a lot of towns, Belfast, Maine, all the way down to Portland, all the way up to the Canadian border that will allow me to like draw what I want to and enjoy that. And I'm on a coastal theme because I love the coast of Maine. I love boats. I'm going to build it in ON30 with a 2-foot field. I that was my attempt on my last railroad, and I think I accomplished it. I had a few naysayers over the years saying, that extra 6 inches ruins everything, but I don't know. I was okay with it. I want a switching layout with some type of staging. I love switching. When I operate on other folks' railroads, I always love doing the yard jobs or that way freight or peddler. And some type of staging, a track or two to send in a train or bring a train in onto the layout. Nothing fancy. I'm going to have an emphasis on scratch building everything. Scratch building is my favorite part of the hobby, and I want to basically scratch build it just about everything I can on the layout. So this plan I showed you earlier in my office that I never got to build evolved into this. This is Hayden Harbor. I showed this last year. This is my third iteration of my 10th revision. So I'm actually on my probably fifth iteration right now. But this particular one fits in a 10-foot wall. I'm going to expand it a little bit to fit in my 11-foot wall. But it has a shoe factory, fertilizer plant, all these little car spots that I've researched and can build structures that will coincide with what they're doing there. I also sketched out this isometric view to help me visualize. I had some time on my hands because I didn't have a layout. I'm not a very good artist, so I wound up building a mock-up of the track plan here and a 1.5 to the 1-foot mock-up. This did a few things. It lets me see what it's going to look like. I also could check a few reach points for like potential uncoupling areas. And if as visitors come by the layout when it's under construction, I can pull this out and they can see what my end goal is. So the track planning process continues on. I've actually earlier before I jumped on this, I was making some changes to the layout as I go, but it continues all the way through your track building. So let's talk about the move. So you've sold the house, it's time to move. Moving is stressful and disruptive. Let me repeat, moving is stressful and disruptive. I've done it. My wife and I've moved probably half a dozen times since we've been married. We're still married, so that's a good idea, good thing. But it's some of the most stressful things in our lives. And for us modelers, one of the stressful things is what to pack. What do we bring? So there's a decision process we all go through, whether we realize it or not. But the first thing is, what do we keep? Well, if it can be used on the new layout, well, certainly you want to keep it. Things like scenery materials, like your base scenery, your plaster, the plaster cloth, the sculpture mold, rock molds, a goop, whatever that I have in a bucket somewhere. Ground cover. I have dirt that I carried from New Hampshire with me, so I carried it out here as well. All those little bags of ground foam and colors and grades that we've collected over the years. Tree materials. It's expensive, and so you want to take it with you. And every layout, except for desert scenes, need a lot of trees. Structures. You probably have a lot of stations that you've built or bridges that mean something because, I know building bridges, they're either, scratch built or they're really nice kits. And if they fit in, you want that. Just other buildings that will fit into your plan. You may want to bring structures. Rolling stock and your locomotives. Well, basically, if they're appropriate for the railroad and era that you're going to model, certainly you want to bring them with you. If not, you may want to think about that. Electronics and control. Well, your DCC system can go. I certainly would have brought mine. Switch machines. Like I mentioned earlier, switch machines are expensive now. Tortoise machines are expensive. Toggles and plugs and all those doodads I hate. No offense, Seth, but I hate all this electronic stuff. So I just lump everything into toggles, all that stuff that I don't know what is, terminal strips, and I don't even know what you're talking about half the time. So in addition to being used on the new layout, does it have some sentimental value? Now be careful here because if you're like me, just about everything I bought has some sentimental value. I remember buying it and why. But there are things like this kit here that my wife saw at the Springfield show up in Massachusetts many years ago. We were walking through. It's a Deerfield River laser kit. She thought it was cute and I should buy it. And when your wife tells you that, you buy it. I was able to find a spot on my old layout for it. I'm not sure if I'll use it on the new layout, but I'll bring it with me because it means something to my wife. This was the first thing I ever made scratch built in N scale more than 40 years ago. This is a little shack. I was transitioning from scratch building boats and ships to model railroading in my 20s. And I thought, what can I scratch build here? So I put this together. This thing is 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. I've used it on past layouts. I probably won't use it on my new layout, but I certainly want to bring it with me, and that's a keeper. It has a lot of sentimental value for me. This lumber schooner I scratch built for my wharf scene on my Wiscasset town back in 2017. I actually took it to an NMRA convention. Mark may remember this back in Austin in 2018, where it won Best in Show. I listened to all these little comments all weekend about who would bring a ship to a model railroad convention. But that Saturday night, I was rewarded with a Best in Show, so that was nice. When I built this, I named it for my mother, the Dorothy Glenn. She was from the New England and originally, and it meant something to me. I'm not planning on using it on the new layout, but I certainly want to keep it. So this is something that has sentimental value, and I would find a place to display it. So if you can't keep it, maybe you can sell it. Now, selling some of your model stuff can generate some funds to help offset the cost of a new layout. Trust me, it won't offset at all because everything's more expensive. Now, but some niche items may be hard to sell. I was modeling an obscure Maine 2-foot railroad in coastal Texas. There are exactly zero people doing that there. And in fact, I'm only aware of a couple of people in the whole state of Texas who model main 2 foot at all. They do it on a different scale and gauge. So all that stuff isn't going to have any value to folks down there. But I had a box of N scale models that I had stored away from my old layouts, and I packaged a bunch of these up and gave them to my friend Brian Jansky, who took them to a local train show in Houston, and he sold them as his table, and he wound up with a lot of cash for me at the end of the weekend. So they found a good home, and I had some cash. I also dabbled in HON30 off and on for years. This is the scale and gauge that David Frary and Bob Hayden made famous back in the 1970s. I always wanted to build a layout like this. I was never good at it. This is one of 2 fornies I bought from Toma Model Works out of Japan. They run pretty good, but they're just so light that if every time I tried to uncouple a car from it, I just knocked everything off the layout. So I decided to take those 2 fornies along with this HO schooner that I had scratch built for an ice diorama that I wrote about in one of the magazines. I don't even remember which one. I took all this stuff up to the narrow gauge convention in Pittsburgh and sold it to some of my friends who do HON30. A little more cash in my pocket, but all this stuff now has a good home with people who appreciate it. So now if you can't keep it and you can't sell it, maybe you can donate it or gift it to someone. So who do you donate or gift this stuff to? Well, there are clubs and schools out there who would love to have it. I gave a few of my N-scale stuff to a local N-scale club. I know there are schools around who have with model railroad clubs who would love to have some of your good stuff. Please don't dump all your Tyco stuff on them that you wouldn't have. That's, that if you wouldn't run it, because that's just discouraging to young folks. But clubs and schools would love to have some stuff. If you model a prototype like I've done in the past, there are historical societies and museums that would love to have some of your models. So uh, I took about a half a dozen of my structures out of the town of Albion up to the town of Albion in Maine last May. Here's me hamming it up with my model of the Albion station in front of the Albion station. I wonder how many times I can say Albion. But the Historical Society was thrilled to have these. They have it on display there. It was a fun trip, and now I know these things will live on. I don't have to store them anywhere. I also brought up these 2 stations of from the town of Wiscasset, and I handed these off to my friend Bob Bennett, who was huge help in orchestrating all this trip last year. And he got these 2 over to the Railroad Museum in Alna, Maine, which since I didn't have the time to do it on my quick trip. So all these have a good home now. You could give things to friends or other modelers. I gave away a lot of stuff, but one particular one that meant something to me, I built this lobster smack, this green boat here in the front. It's called a lobster smack or a friendship sloop. I built this with wood from strip wood from a late friend's estate, a guy named by the name of Danny McGonigal. He, when he passed away, I got all this wood. I built this. I christened it after him. I wasn't going to use it on the new layout because I wanted to build all new boats. But fortunately, my friend Chuck Lynn was also friends with Danny. He was thrilled to have this. So now it sits on his waterfront scene on his ON3 layout just outside of Houston, Texas. So if you're ever out that way, say hi to Danny, who's hoisting the sails right now. Now, if you can't keep it, you can't sell it, and you can't donate it, you're going to have to toss it. This is the last resort. But even that, maybe you can do something. So these structures I built, this was the scene that inspired me to build my last layout. I saw this artist, a painting in a book one day, and I had to have this. So I built these using drawings from the late Peter Barney, who was a great mentor to me over the years, and he was a huge help. Now, I built these as deep flats, so they weren't museum quality. I wasn't going to use them on the next layout. So I simply harvested all the details from them, all the window castings, the doors, the chimneys, and all the little details in and around them. And then when I was done, I just tossed the shells out. So that's an example of one of the things that you have to do. Now, all this stuff the same process works when your household goods and your furniture. My wife and I went through a lot of this. We spent a lot of time going to giving stuff to Goodwill and to Habitat for Humanities and stuff like that. So anyway, now once you've got what you're going to take along with you, you need to pack it up. This is a partial view of what I've got so far of all my model stuff going. Now, this is something you really need to do yourself. I wouldn't trust this to others. I did that years ago when I was making a move, and I had a good friend who thought she would help me by packing up some of my ship models. And she, when I got to the other end, she had put them all in one box, and I opened it up, and it was a box of sticks and strings. So this is something, you know how valuable and how delicate this stuff is. So pack it up yourself. Then California, here we come. 1,500 miles. We get at the new place. You obviously got to set up the new house. You got to be able to cook and eat and sleep and live there. So, but at some point, start unpacking your train stuff. Open the boxes and containers and check for damage. Don't panic. There will be some damage. I was surprised I had as little as I did. One thing I learned, all those metal figures and stoves from Berkshire Valley and things like that you may have glued down into one of your buildings, they will rip loose and roll around in there like a bowling ball inside. So if you can remove them before you pack it up, you're better off doing that. Also, start setting up your workshop and your layout. What are you going to do here? Now, this is that train shed I showed you earlier. It's an 8 foot by 12 foot outbuilding. My son built this for a home office for his wife and himself to work a few days a week. Now, got these nice French doors that when I open up, I can, this, I think it's like 5 feet wide or whatever. It's substantial. You go through the doors, this is what you see. I have a 4 foot wide hobby workbench there in the middle. These shelves on either side hold books and magazines and a lot of the hobby materials I like to keep handy. I've got my modeling paints, hobby paints, and whatever, and a lot of stuff that I'm working on. So the layout's going to go up here. It's 11 feet, 3.5 inches from drywall to drywall. Now, if you look off to the left, I got this desk I bought, and where I have my laptop, I can do computer work. I'm sitting here right now. That's where I'm at right now, talking to you. And up above, here's that schooner, the Dorothy Glenn. She made it unscathed on the move, and now she's on display. I said I'm not going to use it, but I wanted to keep it. So in addition to that, you need to start organizing your stuff. It's amazing how much stuff we accumulated over the decades we've been modeling. So here's the garage. So that where those coats and things are hanging, that's the door to the backside. My son left me this nice little workbench here. It's made of a few IKEA kitchen cabinets that the doors have fallen off, but that's fine. But there's enough shelves and drawers there that I can store a lot of the little containers of stuff I've got. And then I've got a nice little work surface above it. And then at the very top there, I bought and installed these open wire, I think they're called closet made shelves that I could put all those bigger bins of tree material. That I think half of those are tree materials and are trees. I've got, that thing you use static grass, I forget what it's called, the static machine, whatever is in one of them. So all that stuff is out of the way, out of the layout room, but it's still handy that I can get. And by the way, behind us, behind the shop, across the garage, there's a lower bench that my son had a kayak on that he left, and it's so I can do work of do heavy sawing and drilling over there. So with the move done, let's start layout construction. Layout construction to me always starts with a plan. Now, not just the track plan, I hope you've got that, but the plan on the benchwork. So for me, I decided on foam laminated plywood with lightweight framing. I'd always used Homosote in the past. I didn't want to drive 50 miles locally to get a sheet of overpriced Homosote, and it's awfully very heavy. So last year I showed this. This is my test bed of 1 inch pink foam laminated to a 1/4 inch plywood. And then I spiked some turnouts onto ties that the bottom ones are on N scale cork. And both of these worked the other one has no cork. Both of these cycled very well over hundreds of times and none of the rails moved. So that gave me, inspired me to say this should work. So I'm going to build these in sections with no attachments to the walls or floors. I'm going to build it in sections because even though I'm renting my son's house here, I still may move at some point. Who knows? He may kick me out. But I want to be able to take the layout with me. My last one, I had a 10-foot section and a 12-foot section I had to struggle to get out of the garage. So now, as far as attaching to the walls and floors, I'm a renter. And if you're a renter, you want to reduce the number of holes you put in the walls and floors. So nothing's attached here to the walls or floors. So here's the benchwork. It started up on the right side. You can see it's about it's 6-foot section, and I built this with half-inch plywood on a 1x2 frame. I switched from 1/4 inch to half-inch because my son left me a bunch of very good grade partial sheets of plywood, half-inch plywood in the garage. So I went to half-inch because it was free, but the 1/4 inch would have worked. Um, I've mounted these on the shelves. So those I built these shelves out of MDF. They're really heavy, and I knew they could support a good layout. So I built risers to get them off of the shelves to have hand space underneath for stuff. And here I've just thrown some models on there to mock it up. I say to check for clearance, but really I wanted to kind of look at models instead of get them out of the box. Left side I added, this one is only 5 feet, 3.5 inches, so that takes up the rest of the space. And they're going to be bolted together with bolts in the middle. I cut the 1-inch pink foam. I just got this at Home Depot, I think. Cut it to the right size for the section. I drew the track plan directly onto the foam. And then I marked the locations of structures that I knew, like the fish cannery on the left and the boat shop that I've already built is on the right. And then I drew in the shoreline, including a little stream that heads off to the upper right. Will be my cut line that'll cut away the foam so I'll have water in there, so I'll remove that part of the foam. So in addition to benchwork track, for me, I'm going to use cork as road bed. Um, I don't think going directly onto the pink foam is a good idea. It's too noisy. So I'm going to use N scale cork because I had some left over when I was working on my grandson's layout. And I also had to purchase some from Midwest Models. So surprisingly, they still had some N scale around in stock. So this stuff is still around. I think it's just kind of harder to find. And it certainly the price was twice what I paid 15 years ago. So sticker shock there. I used 3 half strips to get the width I needed instead of just 2 strips you typically use for N scale. So this gives me the 6 feet and O scale for my ties. You can see I've gluing it down. I'm using push pins to hold it down while the glue dries. I've also cut that shoreline away, and so the plywood will wind up being water at some point. And then I've started to carve away some of the embankment on a slope on there. Some of it will be vertical because there'll be retaining walls in some cases, but otherwise it's getting there. Turnouts are going to be built using a Fast Tracks jig. I purchased this kit back in 2011 at the Springfield show when I used to live in New Hampshire back then. So it was a quick drive down to that show. But I built 13 turnouts with this thing from my previous layout. I'm going to add some new turnouts with this setup. I have a couple that I've refurbished from my old one that I just saved myself some time, but they were good enough to move. This has been one of the best investments I ever had. So make it very, very good, cost-effective turnouts. I'm going to use Micro Engineering Code 83 rail, works out to about 50 to 60 pound rail, which is appropriate for main 2-foot railroads, spiked on 1/8 by 1/8 inch wood ties that I cut myself. And I'm going to stain them with various solutions. This first one here is a homemade sepia ink. I thought I made a mistake. It kind of came out this dirty, grungy, brownish thing, but I kind of like it. This middle one is Hunter Line Medium Brown. This gives a much grayer, darker color than others. This next one is a very highly diluted solution of the same Hunter Brown stain. I use this for new wood because I find unless it's coming right off the saw, wood shouldn't look like it's just off the saw if it's out more than a day. So this is great for like new wood. It's also great for end grain. So if you have a piece of pre-stained wood that you've got and you need to cut it, to get the end grain, use a diluted solution so it doesn't just soak it up and look like it's black. Now, when I was in Pittsburgh, I stopped by the best, I think, I don't know, it was a table or whatever it was, but I bought 2 bottles of this Vetero. I don't know how you say it, but first one's aged barnwood, which is like a driftwood, a very light gray. And then the next one's a murky brown. So I love all these. So I'm going to use variations of all these to show how ties have been replaced only as needed, everything from a new tie to an old tie. So the plan for track lane was all set. It was time to get the gang to work. So here's an overhead view as I'm starting to install the ties. This is the part of the track plan that I'm working on here. And I've installed the first turnouts, and I had to remember, it's been a long time since I've done this, but get the turnouts installed first before you start laying track. So get them all lined up. But I almost made a rookie mistake, but here they are. Everything's working out pretty well. The backdrop, I'm going to hand paint mine like I did before using this method I learned from Chris Lyons. I see Mark smiling. He can remember all this. So I used to paint my backdrops like this. This was a method from one of the Calmback books some years ago, where you take some green artist, paint some gray and some of your sky blue, and you mix it all together. You do all this stuff, then you do your best to hide it all because no one wants to look at this. So fortunately, I found this series of YouTube videos from Chris Lyons, and using just 2 colors of paint. This is that same view on my old layout with that. So I went from that to that. No additional scenery material was added. So it was remarkable. I was shocked. So I actually have done a few clinics. Mark attended one of them, I think, in Pittsburgh. So I've done a few of these around. Uh, for scenery, I'm going to use ground foam. I've actually brought my dirt. I still have dirt from 20 years ago. I harvested in New Hampshire. Static grass mats. I love these. They kind of the grass is all standing up. We kind of stretch it out. It's a quick and easy way to do some hillsides. Static grass, I'll try again. I wasn't successful very well on my last layout, but I'm gonna give it the old college try here. Super trees, I still have a box of super trees I'm going to use, and scratch built pine trees. I'm modeling Maine. Maine is the pine tree state. When they talk about pine trees, they're talking about eastern white pines. And there's no commercial models available I've ever found. So I scratch built a couple of dozen of these. I managed to pack these things up, and I'm going to use them again because they were a pain in the butt to make, and I don't want to make a bunch more. That area I showed you before, this is the town of Prebles on my old layout. This is just a bunch of scenic super trees and material that I put up. So this, like I said, this is the town of Prebles, but now I don't have to hide the backdrop. It actually looks like it blends right in. So that's another reason for doing it that way. Electrical control. Well, I've got my old Digitrack system I purchased, I'm thinking at least 30 years ago, back when I was doing N scale and before N scale was DCC friendly. I spent a lot of time with my Dremel hollowing out parts of the locomotive mechanism. So here it is installed under the layout. Uh, this toggle here is an on-off testing programming track. I have never had success programming on the layout. I've wind up reprogramming everything to the same address. So I do it off the layout. This toggle is program or run, so it's one or the other. You can't do both. Those 2 wires with the little flag leading off to the left, they have alligator clips on the end. These clip to posts that are on the back side of my test track. This is the front side of the test track. I've got N scale, HO scale track there. So HO works for my ON30. I don't do a lot of programming, but I can do it here. I can test the locomotive and try everything out without worrying about the nuances of the layout. Turnouts, I control these with caboose throws and a lot of blue point switch machines. No offense to Seth, but I hate all the electronics. I have a box full of tortoises that I sold. I still have a box full left. Uh, Blue points work like a tortoise, but there's no motor. They use a push-pull uh, radio-controlled cable to actuate the points. Railroad equipment. Well, I'm fortunate. Rolling stock, Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington really only put car numbers on their cars. They didn't letter most of their cars. So you don't know what railroad this is from. This is perfect. So I can put this on any of my railroads. I also scratch built most of these based on prototype photos that I found in drawings. So I want to be able to use these if I can. And here's another 67 was one of my favorites here. And I built that one, and here it is with color on my old layout. So the advantages, at least for a stand-in, I can use these for years without having to worry about. Locomotives, well, I purchased three of the ON30 Forneys from Bachman over the years, and this is the one I love the most. Once again, no lettering, just a number. So this is a heavily kit bashed, shortened. It's got a Tsunami 2 in it. It looks good. It runs great. It sounds great, and it'll look really good, I think, on the seaside of my new layout. But if I decide to go diesel for some reason, I scratch built this center cab diesel just for the hell of it. I found in my closet an old Bachmann HOGE diesel, and I built a whole new thing around it. And I've got a sound system in there. So when I fire this thing up, it's twin caterpillars come roaring to life. It sounds really good. So this will look good on the layout too. So here's what I've learned so far. Building the sections with the lightweight materials is working for me. These two sections, no more than 6 feet long. The foam turns out to be a good option. It doesn't add any weight. It's easy to work with. I don't even have a hot wire cutter. I just use a sharp knife. I've included a few PC ties in key locations to help keep the rails engaged. I was a little panicky about this, so about every 12 or 15 inches, I included this PC tie to help ensure the rails stay engaged. And where that curve leads off to the future staging, I actually mounted that on a bigger piece of PC board I've had for 40 years. And I swapped out the foam for a scrap piece of Homosoap just to make sure everything is safe and secure. The sections that I built this in can be moved to the workshop in the garage, which has been great. This has made spiking rails so much easier on my back and my neck and my peace of mind. So here I am on this black, I mentioned this kayak bench my son had left me. So it's low. So I'm standing on the floor. I'm leaning over, and I'm not standing on a stool or anything. I'm working on the back side of the layout here, so I can flop this thing around and not have to reach 2 feet over to lay spikes. Wiring a switch machine installation can be done without crawling under the layout. Like I know Seth mentioned earlier about top mounting, but here I've got that section on my ancient workmate, and it's on its edge. I've installed the black and white bus wires. I've dropped a few feeder wires, and mounting those switch machines while standing there is so much easier. And these blue points have a metal bracket that requires
There's some here, I think.
to go in and tighten a nut and bolt. I don't know how I did that on the old layout. I guess magic. Portable lights have made this so much easier on my eyes. So I pull out my photo lights and I can flood the whole area so I can see and do that, whether it's spiking track or fine tuning a turnout. It's so much easier with all that light. So my first train ran on November 30th just to test the wiring and DCC. I was surprised after months it still worked. The rails are going down on the next section. And you may have noticed I've added a turntable on the lower left. I decided to shorten a turntable from my old layout down to about 32 feet, cut it short. I'm trying to install it in the pit. It's going to be an Armstrong. I don't want to add any electronics to it. So I have a reversing circuit from Digitrax and AR1 that will take care of polarity for me. The rails are going down. The rails are all down right now, but right now I'm going to spend days, if not weeks, testing. A friend of mine, Trevor Marshall, had posted recently 0 derailments and 0 stalls. That's my goal. I want to make sure all this stuff runs before I do anything with the scenery. I'm not even going to paint the track until I'm done. I've already located a couple of spots that I need to fix, and I'm going through all my cars in inventory and make sure they're all up to speed. So that's where I stand now. So my journey continues. Thanks for listening, and I appreciate you staying up so late.